Hey everyone, I'm Kip Davis. Welcome to my channel. And this is somewhat unexpected. I didn't think I was going to be here today. My plan was originally to be hanging out with my good friend here, Dapper Dinosaur, but over on his channel. So some stuff happened over the last couple days. Maybe I'll just let Dapper Dinosaur explain what's going on.
Yeah, so I was just using the internet, and I got an alert when I went to go look at a YouTube video that my channel had a community guidelines strike, which was odd because, I don't tend to actually violate any community guidelines. So it said it was for medical misinformation. So when I checked, it was on an episode in which I had been debunking the idea that if you eat enough apricot seeds, you just won't get cancer, or it'll cure your cancer. Apparently, debunking that very obvious lie is in fact spreading medical misinformation, according to Team YouTube. So feel free to go complain at Team YouTube if you think that's BS, which it very much is. But I submitted an appeal, and without much explanation, they then just upheld the strike. So now I can't upload, I can't stream, or put community posts out for another, what is it, 4 or 5 days, something like that, 6 days? I don't know. I basically will be...
You had...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I had
no, I
three
was going to
things
say, you
scheduled.
had stuff scheduled and planned. So this sucks.
Yeah.
A lot. So here's what's going on. And I hope everybody has noticed. I've pinned a link in the chat. There's a link to a GoFundMe that we started just to help cover the costs of the revenue that Dapper Dinosaur has lost for this week. So I'm going to ask, ordinarily, a lot of you people who are regular viewers of Dapper Diners would be like firing off super chats to no end. I'm going to ask you to please save that money and go over and send it to him directly through the GoFundMe, because he can't access any of the he can't access any money that's coming to him through YouTube for the next couple days. So
well, I do want to put a little caveat in there. I will still receive any money.
Let's do that.
I will still receive money from ad revenue and super thanks that are put on the channel. So if you have done one of those, I am still getting that money. It's just I will not be able to get any new super chats because I won't be able to stream. And so this is just to cover that. If you want to, you can put a message in there. I will, I'll read it. So there is that option. And so if you want to send money towards me to help offset this, as well as, to say thank you for the stream, or to ask a good question in there that you want me to have as a high priority, because we're actually kind of acting like I'm the host for this, because originally it was supposed to be me interviewing, Dr. Davis here. So yeah, we're the hosting duties are a little bit weird today is basically what I'm saying. So yeah, if you want a question in like that, like say, like, hey, ask Dr. Kip Davis something, that's a great way to get it to the head of the line, is by donating. And I did notice that we did have a donation of $20 since we started. So thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So just speaking of, we've got one right from the hop here, which I think is worthwhile addressing right away here. Nether Six Hair has asked, should we wait to renew our membership still after the strike, or will you get the money still?
So I will get the money either way. I won't get it until the end of January either way, if you renew this month. So it makes very little difference as far as I'm concerned. If you want to send some kind of message, I guess, but I doubt YouTube will notice. So basically do whatever's most convenient for you in terms of Dapper Dinosaur memberships. If, however, you were thinking about maybe upping a Patreon pledge, this would be an amazing time to do that. And to be fair, I've already had a significant amount of increased Patreon support just in the last few days, including mostly from people who were already there and who decided to up their support. So I want to say it's a very special thank you. You guys have really come together I was
awesome.
expecting this to cost quite a bit to my, it's basically a week worth of income. There's only 4 weeks in the month. So I was expecting to basically have like a 25% cut in that. And that is not what's happening. So I really appreciate it. And I know that this feels a little bit e-beggery, but, I've said this before about 3 years ago or so. After I left the job, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to have a go of it. I'm going to see if I can survive on YouTube. And so far, the answer is yes. And so, but it's constantly dependent on support from viewers because the direct stuff I get from like ads is basically nothing. It barely exists.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
But we don't want to spend the whole time just on my sob story because, well, it's unfortunate, and I do really appreciate the support. And please, share this video, especially in places where you think my viewers normally are. The reason I did this whole thing is because I've been asked more than once on my channel to cover mythicism. And on the one hand, I understand why, right? Like it's a topic that comes up in a lot of sort of pseudoscience debunking skeptic type channels, which my channel fits into not as well as it could, but in many ways. But also, it's because I have a history degree. And I think that people think that, well, if you have a history degree, you must just be an expert in all the history. But in fact, like my minor was in Renaissance and medieval studies, which, as you might not know, or you might or might not know, like that doesn't have a whole lot to do with like first centuries, BCE and CE, like Palestine and areas around there, or Judea, depending on what time we're talking about here. So I wanted to get to talk to Dr. Kip Davis because not only is he an expert in these areas, right, like early Jewish texts, he knows the languages involved, and he is also plugged in with the general academic consensus of biblical studies, all this stuff. But also, he's a fun guy to talk to. So,
thanks, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, I had a lot
that.
of fun last time you were on, or I guess the only time you were on since now I'm on your channel.
That's true. So, and that was super fun, and people should go and check that out as well if you haven't already. Dapper and myself and Vicente had a lovely conversation, I guess a couple of months ago now.
Yeah,
all about dinosaurs and specifically Behemoth and Leviathan in the Book of Job.
And whether or not they're actually dinosaurs, which, spoiler alert, no,
they're not.
They're not. No.
So,
there are dinosaurs in the Bible, like doves and vultures and eagles.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's awesome. So I actually, it looks like I might get the chance to have that conversation all over again later today.
Oh,
because something really exciting is going on in my life. This evening, I am going out to dinner with some longtime friends, one of whom was just recently married to a professional creation evangelist.
Fun times.
How awesome is that going to be? I mean, I can hardly wait. It's going to be amazing.
That'll be a thing. Let me know how that goes. I'll be very curious.
Oh yes, I'm. You will find out. I have no doubt. So yeah. So maybe and the plan for today was just to kind of let Dapper Dinosaur go here and do his thing. So let's just get into this, eh?
All right. So now we're pretending that this is essentially my channel and I'm the host here.
Now your channel. So that also means that you're probably going to have to pay close attention to the chat for comments and questions, because are you going to be able to do that? Or
yeah, I should be able to. If someone in the chat has a specific question for me, there's two easy ways to do it. One is, I mean, if you decide to, in lieu of a super chat, just put in a word of support on a donation to the GoFundMe, I will get that. Actually, I'll read one right now. Jonathan G. Patterson said, pseudoscience sucks. Also, AIG are a satchel of man members. So thank you very much. And we did also, since then, have a recent donation from Michael for $30. So again, thank you very much. But otherwise, if you don't want to do that, which is absolutely okay, I will be reading questions that are not just, paid for. Just try to tag me in the chat so that it appears to my eyes more easily and it highlights it for me. That doesn't mean I won't get your question if you don't tag me or you don't put it in as a word of support. But those are just the reliable ways to do it. So it's possible I might miss your question if it's not tagged or if it's not something that's in the words of support on the GoFundMe. But with that sort of logistic stuff out of the way, so Kit, you are someone who would call yourself a historicist if we had to divide the world into historicist versus mythicist with regards to Jesus of Nazareth, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Now,
and I'm.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you.
Okay. So does that mean that you think that the words of the Gospels as we have them now, the 4 canonical Gospels, are just literally historically true, and that basically people should just be Christians because the real Jesus is right there? There you go.
It's like it's like a newspaper, right? Just
right there.
recording everything. Yeah. No. That is not how I understand myself as an historicist here. There's actually a whole field of study. We'll get into that a little bit as we go on here, devoted to this question of Jesus, who he was, what he did, what happened. So maybe I should just start by telling you what I understand this term to mean. And I have to say at the outset, I don't particularly like the terms historicist, mythicist, and the reason for that is because these are terms that just don't enter into the vernacular of the field. Scholars in the field don't identify themselves as historicists or mythicists, but I mean, one of the reasons for that is because virtually everyone within the field of New Testament studies, within the field of early Jewish literature, which is important to consider here because the New Testament documents are on one level, at least on in a certain respect, considered sorts of Jewish literature, which is my entry point into this. So none of the scholars of early Jewish literature, no historians, as far as I'm aware, like working professional historians attached to institutions, would hold to the idea that there was no historical Jesus. So now I say virtually none. I'm trying to be careful to qualify this here because there might be a handful. And by a handful, I mean, 4 or 6. I don't know. So all that to say, right at the outset, I'm not a fan of the terminology. Until very recently, these terms didn't really exist like they do today. For most of modern history, it was accepted that Jesus of Nazareth was an actual person. But then with the emergence of critical scholarship in and around the late 18th and then in the 19th century, what happened was that this idea of Jesus' existence started to face challenge. People started to say, well, maybe there really was no Jesus. Let's look into this. Let's have a look at this. And the reason for that is because the sources we have as historians, as scholars of the period, they're problematic. So let's just get that out of the way, right? So just in broad strokes, after a few forays here and there into this idea that maybe there was no actual person named Jesus of Nazareth as represented in the Gospels or as spoken of by the Apostle Paul, it's come to be accepted up until now. Very recently, all historians, virtually all New Testament scholars, will agree that there most likely was a man. His name was probably Jesus, and he had a following who went on to found Christianity. So in the broadest of strokes, that's kind of what an historicist is.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily someone who is simply believing the tenets of Christianity, but it's someone who's saying, at the very least, this entire movement is based on the life of a guy who had an actual life, who lived, who died, who was in roughly the place that the stories put him in, which is to say, first century Judea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Because that is one of the things I want to say, because I do find that a lot of people will say things like, well, what, are we just going to accept the Gospel of John as a historical narrative with no caveats? And it's like, no, that's not the position that's necessarily mainstream, right? Sure, I guess you can. I'm not going to stop you. I don't care what religion you're going to follow. But when it comes just to the, historicity of the thing, we can say with pretty high confidence, yeah, there was a guy.
Yeah,
there was a guy.
And we'll get into that. And I think you're hitting on a big part of the problem here, is how much people conflate these ideas. For the better part of the 20th century, many New Testament scholars have started to examine the sources to provide what they would consider to be an historical view of Jesus, distinct from the Christ of faith, the Jesus as we know him from the Gospels, the Jesus as he survives in our Christian traditions. Mm-hmm. And this has come to be known as historical Jesus studies. It's the historical exploration of Jesus and his movement. And there's even an academic journal published by Brill on the topic. For 20 years now, there's almost 60 issues of the journal for the study of the historical Jesus. And this is not a confessional journal. This is a journal that is published by E.J. Brill, which is one of the largest academic publishers in the world. I'll just read you here the journal description that they've provided on their own site. The Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus provides an international forum for the academic discussion of Jesus within his first century context. The journal is accessible to all who are interested in how the complex topic has been addressed in the past and how it is approached today. The journal investigates the social, cultural, and historical context in which Jesus lived, discusses methodological issues surrounding the reconstruction of the historical Jesus, examines the history of research on Jesus. It explores how the life of Jesus has been portrayed in historiographical reception and other media. The Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus presents articles and book reviews discussing the latest developments in academic research in order to shed new light on Jesus and his world. So, in this sense, an historicist is a person who accepts this minimum premise, that there was a man who lived in Galilee in the first century. He was an apocalyptic charismatic of some sort who amassed a group of followers that might not even have been very big. And then he got himself in trouble with the Romans. He was executed, and these followers, after his death, came to believe that he had risen from the dead. He may or may not have thought of himself as the Messiah. He may or may not have said some of the things in the Gospels. Historicism is nothing more than the claim that Jesus existed and that Christianity is the outcome. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Now, Benjamin Love has, for a $20 super chat, said, it's the historicity of the greatest love story ever told that was written in blood on a cross 2,000 years ago. The greatest free gift ever given, and that is history. So I'm going to say this real quick. I'm not going to tell you to stop being a Christian or to stop believing in the salvific work of Christ on the cross or anything like that. What I am, however, going to tell you is that the things that you believe as a Christian and the things that historians can demonstrate from the actual data and the historical record that we have extant at this point are not the same things. Now, I do want to point out that most of the things that have ever happened in the world are things that historians will never know about.
It's true. Right? Yeah.
Billions of people have lived lives, had children, had jobs, had friends, hosted, family party, whole full lives, and they were completely lost to history. Most of the things that have ever happened are just never going to be known about. Now, I am not here. It's not my shtick to be like, oh no, stop being a Christian. But when we talk about what is historically relevant in terms of the actual study of history, that is a much smaller number of things, and we cannot say as many things as a believing Christian might like for historians to be able to say. Sorry.
Correct. Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I think Gillian, the entire column is Igneous Ren, makes a pretty good counterpoint here too, that the greatest love story ever told was Titanic.
Yes,
it's possible. It's possible. Actually, I'm currently rewatching The Office, the American version of The Office, and I think another great case can be made for the greatest love story ever told to be that between Pam and Jim.
Okay.
It might be one of my favorites. So
it certainly is a great love story.
That's just me. It's one of the great love stories of our time. Definitely.
I definitely agree.
So there we go.
Also, we did have a comment about the pronunciation of Jesus from Graham Pong. And I'm going to just say, I don't really want to get into the etymology of how English comes to the word Jesus. But it is not really relevant to this particular thing, whether or not we would like to use the standard English word Jesus, or if we would like to go ahead and grab a transliteration of the Greek Iesus, or if we would like to try to go back to like how it was probably pronounced in either like sort of a general Judean Aramaic or even a Galilean Aramaic, because there's an accent difference. I don't want to have to sit here and try to make Dr. Kip Davis pronounce things like voice pharyngeal fricatives all day. So, and because this is a stream in English, and Jesus is the standard word for this character from history, we're just going to use the word Jesus.
With that.
And yeah, we're both aware of the history of Latin transliterations and the addition of the letter J in Germany going over into English, and all of that. We're aware. It's not the topic, and for now, we're just going to use the word Jesus. Michael Scott and Holly.
I think it's a good move. They were. Yes, they were. So, and in my rewatch, I'm not quite at the reconnection yet, though. So I'm reserving judgment. Okay.
Okay.
So I wanted to on that point too. I do think it's important to point out. Sorry. Am I oh no, wrong one. Sorry. I meant to highlight this one. Am I a gymnast? That's it's good to see you, Jared. I only recognized that after I pulled that up. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that one too. I am agnostic on the existence of Jim. So
what about the existence of Asian Jim?
So I wanted to say it's probably important to point out here too that this this is an actual this is part of the discussion is whether the name was Yehoshua or Yeshua or another derivative of some sort. It's an open question, right? So I don't want to trivialize it, but it's certainly not the point today.
It's an interesting discussion. It's just not the one we're having today.
Yep. I do think this was another good question too.
I did see that.
Yeah.
And so one of the basic ways we get information about pronunciation from ancient languages is by looking at things like poetry. Like if two words are supposed to rhyme and we have a rhyme scheme and we're not sure how to pronounce one word, we can check the other ones and we can say there's that. We also have transliterations into other languages. So for instance, if someone writing Greek is transliterating Aramaic words, they're going to get as close as they reasonably can with the Greek alphabet and the limits of Greek. And so we can check that back again. We also have things like people wrote grammars and dictionaries in the ancient times for both people who spoke the language and for language learners. That's not a modern phenomenon. Obviously, they weren't as widely disseminated. You couldn't just go down to the store and pick up, your 500 verbs in Aramaic from Greek or something. But like we have sources for this. And so we have people describing how sounds were pronounced. And sure, they weren't using modern phonetic terms, but we can still get a very good estimate. And then in cases where there's still some question, we can use the techniques of historical linguistics to go ahead and look and say, okay, well, what kinds of sound changes do we expect? How does this particular letter that we can trace throughout the history of this language family, how does it evolve? What is its most likely original pronunciation? what possible pronunciations at different stages in the languages that have evolved from, say, Proto-Semitic, what are they likely to be? And also, there's just the fact that when it comes to consonants, at least, you can often check with Arabic, which has absurdly conservative consonants in terms of phonetics from like
Right.
Proto-Semitic. Richard Lindahl for $5 says, is it not revealing that mythicism is pretty much only popular among anti-theists speaking as an atheist? Yes, it is.
Yeah, I think so.
But also,
too.
do remember, in lieu of super chats, if possible, it would be appreciated if instead that was sent to the GoFundMe, because we are trying to recoup for the fact that YouTube has shut down the original version of the stream that would have been on my channel. So, not that I'm not going to read super chats here, because, you know, Kip deserves money too.
Not as much.
Well,
so so this is, but I think this is an important point to make here as well. That what we come to discover in this is that so much of the argumentation from those who promote themselves or who promote the idea of mythicism, and this is one of the reasons why it survives where it does, which seems to be you know, on the internet by and large has barely made a dent, if at all, in actual academics. So and this is one of the reasons you will see people who promote this idea quite frequently start from a position of being very polemic against religion generally, against Christianity in particular, and I think this does have a tendency to feed into where this type of thinking comes from, and how seriously why many of these people do take this, you know, people who do take this seriously, the reason why they do.
I've noticed there's a certain group of people who seem to be willing to believe anything as long as that thing would be bad for Christianity if it were true. Which is not a great heuristic for actually getting to the facts of matters, you know? Sometimes things that are good for Christianity, if they were true, turn out to be true. And sometimes things that would be bad for Christianity, if they were true, turn out to be true. And vice versa. Sometimes those things turn out to be false. Turns out that what would be good for believing Christians, if it were true, has no bearing on the likeliness of it being true for the most part. So,
true.
But I want to get into mythicism. So what is the basic premise behind mythicism, now that we've talked about basically what historicism is, even though it's a term that really shouldn't need to exist, but here we are.
I have no doubt that that if there were a proponent of mythicism here in our conversation, that at this point I would be charged with not being good enough at steel manning or representing the position, because this is something that does come up quite frequently. So I would say that just very, very generally, mythicism is the rejection of this basic idea, and on the basis of the quality of the evidence for the historical Jesus. The evidence is not great. There's holes in it. We'll get to some of those. And on that basis, people think it's reasonable to assume that that there never was a guy. And I will say, from a responsible historical perspective, yes, we absolutely have to be open to this possibility. You know, this is history is in large part attempting to determine the most probable unfolding of events in an effort to understand what happened in the past from the sources that we have for it. So we can only be as certain as the sources allow us to be. And in this case, yeah, I mean, it certainly raises the question. The question should be continually kept in mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the problem here is that with regards to the sources, the Gospels are theological fictions. One of the things that that New Testament scholars have been doing for over a century now is exploring and coming to a clearer understanding of what these texts are and how much they are programmatic narratives in an effort to explain particular theological points. It's very, very difficult to glean any sort of historical data from these texts because that's just not of any interest to the writers of these texts. Paul's letters make almost no mention of Jesus's actual life and his teachings, and that can be a problem. Third-party attestations to Jesus, such as we find in Josephus or Tacitus or Suetonius, are fairly late. There's nothing contemporary. So this is kind of where this comes from. And mythicism is the basic idea that since if we accept that there was no Jesus, then Christianity must have originated as a movement based on a mythical figure and through a collection of myths. So at this point, I'll just go to the I think there's different forms of mythicism. I'm certainly not all that familiar with most of them. The one I am most familiar with is Richard Carrier's minimal mythicism theory, which he published in his book on the historicity of Jesus. And here's the 5 premises that he puts forward as minimal mythicism. First, at the origin of Christianity, Jesus Christ was thought to be a celestial deity, much like any other. Second, like many other celestial deities, this Jesus communicated with his subjects, communicated being in quotation marks, only through dreams, visions, and other forms of divine inspiration, such as prophecy, past and present. Third, like some other celestial deities, this Jesus was originally believed to have endured an ordeal of incarnation, death, burial, and resurrection in a supernatural realm. Fourth, as for many other celestial deities, an allegorical story of the same Jesus was then composed and told within the sacred community which placed him on earth in history as a divine man with an earthly family, companions, and enemies, complete with deeds and sayings and an earthly depiction of his ordeal. Fifth, and finally, subsequent communities of worshippers believed, or at least taught, that this invented sacred story was real and either not allegorical or only additionally allegorical. So that's the basic premises. And one of the things that I want to really zero in on here is that, and I think this is something that Richard gets right. I think the question is, it appears in colloquial spaces, did Jesus exist? I think this is actually miscast on the existence, non-existence of the man of Jesus. And the real question that should be considered is, how did Christianity begin? And the reason for this is because so many of our sources, most of our sources, our earliest sources, are all Christian literature. The real question here needs to be, how did this movement start? And was there a person behind it? Who was it? These sorts of things. As I said, Carrier recognizes this, which is why he set his focus on making a case for the origins of Christianity from a purely invented figure. The real question then is, which of these propositions, real historical figure, purely mythical figure, best explains the how and the why of Christianity?
Okay. So we have a super chat. Let's see. Let me make sure I get this. Stephanie for $10 says Venmo is being stupid. So here's my Dino donation. Thank you very much. I'm not going to ask Kip to try to send me money from this, because that's going to be a giant hassle. It is
from Canada to the US, especially. It gets really messy, guys. So I'm really sorry about that. And when we were sort of figuring out how on earth we could do this, it seemed like the GoFundMe was probably the best way to directly get Dapper Dino the money that you ordinarily would be giving him on this platform. I certainly appreciate the support, but if you could please, I've got the link for the GoFundMe pinned at the top. again, just to remind everyone, please please send your money over there.
In the description, there's also a link to my Patreon that should be working. People do donate in local currencies there, so that shouldn't be a problem if you want to. There are multiple tiers. You can join for an entire year for less than $11 US. So, if that's something that you're interested in, you still have access to all my early access stuff because those videos are already published. They're not public, but they're published as unlisted videos, and so you could go there and watch hours and hours and hours of Dapper Dino content if you wanted to. Okay, so I think the thing that I would like to ask next is a pretty basic one, which is to say, so why are you someone who, along with, almost the entire rest of the field in this topic, accept the historicity of Jesus of Nazareth at that minimal level, at least? What is the evidence that we have that makes us come to that conclusion?
So it will come as no surprise to everyone that I am part of a giant global biblical studies cabal that is very powerful and determined to suppress the truth of Jesus' non-existence.
Because despite not being a Christian, you really want Christian hegemony to persist for
obviously
reasons,
right? So no, that I was joking. In case you missed it. So the way that I like people right at the outset too. So I'm not a New Testament scholar, and I'm not a scholar of early Christianity either. I mean, I had to do a lot of work in this literature, in particular in grad school. But my interest here is as a specialist particularly in early Judaism. As I mentioned already, the New Testament on some levels is a product of Judaism. Paul was Jewish. The Gospels purport to have originated from within early Judaism, and I think there's very good reasons to accept that is the case, that is true, and we'll get into some of these a little bit as we go here. So for all their problems, for all the issues that I pointed out above, the fact that the Gospels they're fairly late, all of them. Most scholars date to after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem.
And that would be the year 70, Romans, right?
That's the year 70. I think that I think there's a relatively plausible case to be made that at least Mark could have been written before that. I don't know how firmly I hold to that, but it's not completely out there, right? So they're late, and as mentioned, these are not histories in the way that we understand them. They've been classified as bios, or Greco-Roman biographies, which is probably the closest generic classification for this type of literature. But there's even some issues with that. By and large, I think most scholars accept that the Gospels are sort of like their own thing, and this creates all sorts of problems. These are theologies. These are Christian theologies, which are grounded in the in the life and teachings of Jesus. I think for lack of a better way to describe them. But in spite of all that, the Gospels and the letters written by the Apostle Paul between, I think it's like the year 45 or 47 and the late 50s CE, these are still exceptionally useful sources for studying early Judaism. Prior to the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is my specialization, I think people need to be clear about this. There was no Palestinian Jewish literature that we knew of from the period. So as much as the Gospels will caricature Judaism, which is a real problem, they clearly reflect the milieu of first century Palestine. For the issues that are there, these are still really useful sources for helping us to understand what Judaism looked like in the first century in Palestine. So first of all, I'm an historicist because the New Testament is a collection of documents which preserves tons of information about early Judaism, and they make the best sense in view of there actually being an historical Jesus. So our earliest sources, the Gospels, the Apostle Paul, these all indicate that Jesus was an actual person. Even from a fairly rigorous historical examination, we can still walk away with the sense that, yeah, there probably was a guy. So the Gospels are problematic, but they do contain some indicators of being set in actual history. There's a couple of these that I thought I would point to. First of all, one of the features of the Gospels that I see as particularly interesting and useful in terms of understanding their origins within early Judaism, tracing back to this movement, is the presence of a lot of there's a handful of actual Aramaic words which are preserved within the Gospels that are not they are transliterated into Greek, but then occasionally also translated. We have examples of these in Mark 5:41, for example, when Jesus raises the daughter of Jairus, I think it's Jairus, from the dead. He says Talitha kum, which means daughter, rise up, or you should rise up, you, or and this is an Aramaic term. What's really interesting in this case is that the way that the Gospel of Mark presents this word, the way that he transliterates it, is phonetic, because you would write you would write the expression with a vocalization on the end of the word to indicate that this is feminine, but when you say it, like when it's pronounced, you don't actually pronounce that, and that's kind of how it's presented in the Gospel, which is pretty interesting. In Mark 2:27, Jesus, I'm just going to pull this up actually and read it. So Jesus, there's a story of Jesus walking in the walking through the field, and he gets in trouble with the Pharisees for picking grain on the Sabbath. And in Mark 2:27, his response to the Pharisees is, the Sabbath was made for mankind, and not mankind for the Sabbath. So then the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. And on the face of it, it's an unusual, it kind of doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of the flow of the statement. The Sabbath was made for humankind. Mankind was not made for the Sabbath. And from that statement, Jesus then declares that the Son of Man, presumably speaking of himself, is the Lord of the Sabbath. It's like the conclusion doesn't match the premise. And part of the problem here is a translational issue on the part of the Greek writer here. If we recognize that the word for mankind in Aramaic is baranosh, then the way this reads is like this: the Sabbath was not made for baranosh, and baranosh was not made for the Sabbath. So then, Bar Enosh is the Lord of the Sabbath. So what the Greek translator did here was misunderstood this expression, and kind of messed up the translation of the text to say something that it probably didn't originally mean. I'll go to what else here. In Mark 15, verse 34, when Jesus is on the cross, he says, he says from the cross, and this is recorded in Mark and then repeated also in I believe it's in all four Gospels. He says, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is Aramaic for my God, why have you forsaken me? And then the translator then has also put in the translation, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means my God, why have you forsaken me? So this is from Psalm 22, and Psalm 22 actually sort of sets the framework for much of what's happening in the crucifixion of Jesus. The writers of the Gospels, beginning with Mark, which virtually all scholars accept was first, and then Matthew and Luke, were kind of versions of Mark. They were new versions of Mark. So they all kind of ground their story of Jesus' crucifixion on the basis of Psalm 22. And in Psalm 22, verse 2, it says, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is interesting because in the Aramaic, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, this is, I mean, it's possible that they had access to an Aramaic text translation of this expression, but we don't have any that survive that looks like that. The Aramaic Targum, the one Targum that we do possess of Psalm 22, actually says it a little differently here. It says, I'll just pull it up here. Oh, where did it go? Okay, there we go. So the Aramaic text says, oh, I should have had this. There we go. Eloi, Eloi, metul ma sabachthani. So it's just a slightly different way of saying the same thing, right? So it seems likely, it seems probable that many of these Aramaic expressions or ideas you can trace back to a community living in Palestine who preserved sayings of their leader. They understood the world through this Palestinian Jewish lens of Aramaic. So that's, I mean, I consider that to be a fairly useful argument for some of the historicity of elements within the Gospels.
Right.
So the other thing that I'll point to as well is the way that many of the Gospels, all of the Gospels, really handle this idea of prophecy. So it's very important for all of them. It's very important to the Christian writers, to the first Christians, that Jesus was the Messiah who was fulfilled through Old Testament prophecies. And there's hundreds of them scattered throughout the New Testament. And what one will quickly come to realize is how ad hoc the application of so many of these Old Testament texts are to Jesus. And this was, I mean, part of this is a product of just the way that Jews from the period handled and understood their own scriptures. But then part of the problem here has to do with just how much flexibility was required in order to make these texts fit what actually happened. And I'll get into this as we go on, but we have some other examples from early Judaism, not Christian texts, of other Jews doing exactly the same things with their texts applied to their own history.
Right. We got a couple things. Stephanie for
Okay.
$5 said, "I'll just join Dino on Patreon." Dr. Kip, you said you would never wear a bow tie, but you might do No Shave November.
Oh, shoot. It ended, didn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it did.
Rats.
Thank you very much,
I'm
Stephanie.
sorry, Stephanie. My mind is like Swiss cheese. It really is.
Daniel N. Galota, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, for $20 said, "Simply put, it makes the best sense of the data, sources, and rise of ancient Christianity. Scholars disagree on the how, but we all basically agree that the historical Jesus is a part of the how Christianity got going."
Thanks very much, Daniel. So for those of you who don't know, Daniel Galota is actually a recent PhD graduate from the University of Stanford, I believe. And he's a scholar of the period. He actually wrote a solid review of On the Historicity of Jesus that he had published in the Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus. Please let me know if I got all that right, Daniel. Oh, yep, he says correct. Awesome. Nice. Thanks. It's good to see you here, by the way. So
yes, it is. So
there we go.
I did have a question that I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
So when we gave the translation of the opening line of Psalm 22 from the transliterated version from the Gospels, and then you gave it from the Targum, my understanding was that the main difference there was that a different set of preposition and interrogative pronoun was used for to translate why.
Yes.
Okay. Because I don't.
Yeah, that's it.
I've literally never studied Aramaic, but like I know just enough Hebrew and just enough Arabic that I'm like, I think I know what's happening here. So it's good to know that I was there on that.
Thanks for pointing it out, because I just like ran right over that. So
look, I wouldn't have even noticed had I not had a little bit of background with the languages involved, or not even the languages involved, like related languages to the language involved.
Nice. Well,
it turns out that the West Semitic languages are all actually pretty closely related. It's surprising the degree to which they are similar.
It really is. And for most people who learn Aramaic, they start with Hebrew. And then, when they get to Aramaic, they're delighted to discover that most of the words that they already know are in there. And that in terms of the, conceptually speaking, it functions very much the same way. Arabic's pretty similar too in that regard. The very little bit of Arabic that I've done, it was pretty easy.
It has very similar enclitic pronouns to Hebrew.
Yeah.
It has all of the like prefix prepositions in Hebrew are basically the same as they are in Arabic.
Yeah. And I think too, like even getting a handle on the alphabet, things as simple as that, right? Like once you've learned the Semitic alphabet, it's kind of like all the other ones are pretty intuitive.
Yeah, they all have basically the same letters. It's just that in different alphabets they end up in different shapes. But like if you remember, like, okay, Hebrew Aleph looks like this, and Arabic Aleph looks like this, and like Syriac Aleph looks like this. It's the same basic letter. It's doing the same job in every alphabet, or more properly, abjad. For those of you who care about the difference between alphabets and abjads.
There you go.
But now we're getting way too into the weeds on linguistics.
A little bit. I had a couple more things I wanted to say.
Oh, please go ahead.
About why I'm an historicist. I'm gonna go back again here to just Paul's presentation of Jesus. Paul is our earliest source for Jesus, for early Christianity, and there are a handful of really important key texts that indicate very clearly that he understood Jesus to have lived and died on earth. I'll pull up three of them. These are three very, very popular, very well known passages because of this discussion. First of all, in Romans chapter 1, verses 1-3, Paul introduces himself as a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, the gospel concerning his Son, who was descended from David according to the flesh. So this is a fairly straightforward, very easily understood within the text language and culture of the period to be an expression of Jesus' humanity, his existence on earth. In Galatians chapter 1, very importantly, in verses 18 to 19, Paul tells us that he met with and spoke to Jesus's actual brother James. He says here, after 3 years, I went up to Jerusalem, which is where Christianity began, was in Jerusalem, to visit Cephas, and stayed with him 15 days. But I did not see any other apostle except for James, the brother of the Lord. So here, it's one of the very, very difficult things to account for without positing that there was an actual Jesus who actually lived and died on earth, is the presence of a brother, an actual brother that Paul met and spoke to. And finally, later in Galatians, in chapter 4, verse 4, he makes a similar attestation as in Romans to the existence of Jesus as a man. He said, when the fullness of time had come, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, in order to redeem those who are under the law, so that we might receive adoption as children. So this expression, born of a woman, is it appears a little bit differently when Paul uses it, but it reflects a very commonly attested Jewish Semitic idea of existence. This idea we see it appear a couple times in the book of Job. The same expression in Hebrew, born of a woman, when Paul is when Job is speaking of just general humanity, human beings. Mm-hmm. We also see the same expression in the Dead Sea Scrolls to indicate human beings. So these are simple little things that appear in Paul's writings, and the takeaway from that of these for most scholars and for most historians is the most natural way to understand these expressions are that they are with reference to, Jesus's human existence, Jesus as a human being. And then I think there was one of the things that I also wanted to point out too, the existence of the presence of James himself and his relationship to Jesus is also attested by Josephus in book 20, line 200. Josephus says here, I didn't bother to pull up the English, so I've got the Greek text here. Whoops.
You'll just have to translate it as you go in Greek.
This is going to be fun.
While you're getting that ready, though, real quick, Daniel and Gulota. How do you say it, Dr. Kip Davis?
I don't. I honestly,
you don't?
I've not met Daniel. I've only spoken to him online.
Okay. Well, he says for $10 on this subject would recommend Simon Gathercole, The Historical and Human Existence of Jesus in Paul's Letters in the Journal for the Study of Historical Jesus, 16 2-3 2018, 183 through 212. Thank you very much. And I do want to reiterate, we are encouraging people in lieu of super chats to use the link that is pinned. There is an option to send a message along with any donation, because we are trying to use this in part to recoup for the fact that this is not going out on my channel. Discovering Ancient History for $2 says, Kip Davis is part of the conspiracy, with a wink emoji. Yes, obviously, that is the only option.
Of course.
Yes.
Of course. Sorry, I'm having problems pulling this up. But basically, Josephus makes mention, he in his discussion of book 20, he goes into a lengthy at the end of Antiquities, he goes into a lengthy discussion about how and why the city of Jerusalem was sacked and the temple was destroyed, and he spends a lot of time talking about the problems with the priesthood, the corruption in the priesthood, and he highlights a number of these these corrupt or just poor priests. Now, around the 50s, there was a priest who was installed by the name of Annas or Ananias, and Josephus tells us that this happened at a point in time when there wasn't a Roman governor installed, and Ananias saw this as a political opportunity, so he rounded up a bunch of people within the city, within Jerusalem, who he didn't like, and he had them quickly tried on for failure to observe Jewish law, and then executed. But when he says this, when Josephus makes mention of this, he says that he rounded up James, the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ, and some other men. He had them executed. As a result of this, the people from the city were very upset about, this newly installed priest making this huge political overreach, and then just rounding up a bunch of people and executing them. So they complained to Rome. Rome deposed Annas, and they installed in his place a priest by the name of Jesus Ben Damnius, and then Josephus continues with his story. So, but what we have here is a clear mention of James and an indication that he is the brother of this rather well-known figure, Jesus, who was considered by some to be the Messiah. This is an important reference, in part because this is something not only would have taken place within Josephus's lifetime, but it's probably something that he witnessed firsthand. If you don't know anything about Josephus, he was born in 37 CE. He was a wealthy member of the Jewish aristocracy. He was actually part of the delegation, the delegation who went to negotiate with Rome in the period leading up to the Jewish War. So at this time, he probably would have been, in his late teens, early 20s. He would have seen this happen. He had firsthand experience with this incident where James was executed by Ananias. So those are just some of the things that I see as very much fitting very neatly within an historical model of Jesus as an actual guy.
Yeah, and the thing is, or one of the things that I was thinking about earlier when we said that this was all, or the argument is that maybe this is all just based on a mythical character, like happens in a lot of religious traditions. But the big difference is that generally when that happens, you set the historical narrative so distantly in the past that it's hard to check on. You don't set it like 60 years ago, right? That seems a little recent.
Yeah, I think that could potentially be problematic, right? Like it's I think you're right. Well, what we often see when making these sorts of comparisons to the idea here is that there's places within history where mythical figures have been euhemerized or turned, inserted into history, and by and large these have these are figures who stretch very deeply back into the distant past. And I think a clear, a more or less clearly related case to this is basically what happens with the invention of Moses by the ancient Israelites, the precursors to the Jews. Had this idea that there was this figure who led Hebrews out of Egypt, Hebrew slaves out of Egypt, and into the land of Canaan. There's all sorts of historical problems with the biblical story, the way the biblical story has been told about this. But it, and these are very late. Like, most of this stuff is not written down until literally hundreds of years after an event like the Exodus. But even then, I will say that there is some possibility that there could have been a person of some sort who led a slave revolt, or who led a group of slaves out of Egypt at some point in time into the land of Canaan. In the book of Hosea, chapter 12, when it makes mention of, and this is a very early text, most scholars date this to the 8th century BC. When Hosea talks about the Exodus, he mentions a prophet. The prophet is anonymous. He never actually names him as Moses, right? So, but even stuff like this, even the stuff that's far removed from history, as historians, we still have to keep that question open about how much of this we can plausibly tie back to something that actually happened. And of course, the unfortunate thing is, as far when these things are very, very far removed, as in this case, then it's almost impossible to tie it back to anything that actually happened.
All right. So once again, I'm going to say, please, in lieu of super chats, do send a message to GoFundMe that is linked in the pinned comment, or the pinned chat. Sorry. It is an important distinction because we are trying to do this to help offset the fact that YouTube has more or less violated their own policies and just given someone who was defending actual science a community guideline strike for no reason. But Daniel and Galota, I'm going to go with that, for $10 says, James having such authority and being singled out in 1 Corinthians 15:7 by Paul makes the best sense if he was simply Jesus' brother. If not, he was just another Christian brother. Why not include him in verse 6?
See, this is problematic, right? We'll get to, I maybe we'll save this when we get to some of the next stuff that I have. But I wondered, I know you usually take a break, Dapper Dino, to just kind of stretch your legs and stuff
It's honestly
middle
usually
of the
to refill my alcohol, and I'm not drinking today. So if you want to take a break, we can. But
I thought maybe we could just take like a 2-minute break, because I wouldn't mind refilling. I'm still drinking coffee here. So why don't we just take a pause? Okay. And I will go and refill my my coffee, and I'll be back.
All right. I'll be right back too.
Okay, I'm back.
I am back too.
All right. Back. Awesome.
Cool. Even the audience is back.
No.
Yeah.
Thank goodness.
Normally, every time I take a break, I see a little drop. But this time, if anything, I think it went up a little bit. Last time I was looking, it was like 118 or something, and then it went up to like 120 during the break.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool.
So
I'll just remind everyone to keep we very much appreciate your engagement. Please keep sending your support over to the GoFundMe, which is pinned at the top of the chat. Make sure it's
I also want to say a thank you to Renee, who recently donated $5 to that. So thank you very much, Renee. There was no message with it, but I do appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
So let's take a look at what are the arguments that are used by mythicists, including I think the primary driver of mythicism is unarguably Richard Carrier, right? Like I don't think he's the only person who's even, as far as I can tell, like close to credentialed, who makes it his mission to push for Jesus mythicism.
So there are I'll just clarify here. There are a handful. I think Richard is far and away the most prominent one. He is also the only. Well, there's him and Raphael Lataster to date have managed to publish studies of this question in peer reviewed volumes. But in addition, Thomas Brodie is a retired scholar who was also a Catholic priest, who in his memoir came out on the side of thinking that there was no historical Jesus. I have it on my shelf. I haven't got around to reading it yet, but I have been also told that that his ideas about this depart quite a bit from what Carrier has done. So I don't know anything about his view. The other one is Robert Price, who is a credentialed scholar and was for a very long time the face of Jesus mythicism. More recently, he's kind of gone off the deep end on a whole bunch of terrible conspiracy theories. But he's
as part of the conspiracy. Can you tell us which of his conspiracy theories are right?
Which of his conspiracy theories are right?
Yeah, obviously, because you're part of the conspiracy, so you would know.
Oh, right. Yes. No, we drummed him out, man.
Okay.
Just tossed him right out because he was getting too.
For $10, Jake Nelson says, "I already put it on the GoFundMe. Here's a tenner for you, Kip, for having our boy Dappers back. Thank you very much, Jake Nelson. That is much appreciated."
Right? And
I want to say, guys, that the GoFundMe was primarily created for today, and even before we started, it was already more than halfway done, just from people who were either in my supporter Discord server or who were on. I'm just going to say Twitter. I'm never going to call it X. It's just not going to happen.
It's not.
Yeah. And so I just want to say thank you so much for all that support, because that is a really big help. It's been a big weight off my shoulders because, like, I'm not in immediate danger of being homeless or anything, but it's a big hit to the budget, right? It makes a difference.
Stressful.
Yeah.
It's very stressful.
So
right?
I just want to say thank you. So okay, let's just start with this. What do you think is the best argument that mythicists have put forward? The one that you find that maybe you don't accept it, but when you listen to it, you're like, okay, yeah, I can see why that is something that people find compelling.
So I guess maybe I'll put it this way. One of the things that the emergence of mythicism has done is it's forced scholars to more carefully inspect and more carefully present their understanding of this question, right? I think this has actually helped quite a bit in terms of refining the method and the scholarship, and I expect this to continue as well. So I mean, and that stems from the recognition of some real problems. The Gospels are really problematic. Mm-hmm. Paul's writings on several levels is really problematic, and so I think the fact that the Gospels are almost purely theological documents, and the fact that so much of this literature is fairly late, I would say that these are excellent observations, and it's stuff that scholars really need to take seriously, which is I mean, this is what I see happening. in the field is the wide recognition by scholars of these problems and the obstacles they create to this study, which is why so much of the focus more recently has been, I think, I'll just one of the every year the Journal for the Study of the Historical Jesus basically does like a state of the field article, and at the end of 2022, who was it now? James Crossley wrote an article, the State of the Field article, and in there he pointed out that right now, so much of the serious investigation, the questions that historians really need to be grappling with, is a continued refinement of the methodology, making sure that the methods applied to the question of the historical Jesus, of the origins of Christianity, are, historically robust questions. And I think the emergence of mythicism can take some credit for that. Also, it's I think as a result, we see a lot of the focus here shifting back to where it properly belongs, which is providing clearer explanations of the emergence of Christianity. I mean, one of the things that scholars are coming more and more to recognize is that Christianity that emerged in the late first century into the second century is Paul's version of Christianity. That Paul could be considered the founder of Christianity as we know it, but then also there's still this Jewish movement behind there that existed in Jerusalem.
Mm-hmm.
We know it was there. Paul himself talks about it. Unfortunately, we know very, very little about it, and that's one of the challenges here. Is attempting to uncover, what this Jesus movement looked like before Paul. I'll just say too, the reason why the Jesus movement before Paul didn't survive is because Jerusalem was sacked. The church in Jerusalem died when the city was destroyed, as many things died with the.
Yeah, it's hard to keep that community together when you're kicked out of the city. Because one of the things you got to remember is that it wasn't just that the temple was destroyed; the Jews were kicked out. A new city was built on the location, more or less. Yeah, and they weren't allowed back in except for once a year for the next more than 1,000 years. So
and this is and the followers of Jesus weren't alone in this. I mean, for the most part, the Sadducites or the Sadducees, disappeared with the destruction of Jerusalem. The Essenes disappeared with the destruction of Jerusalem. So, of course, this early Jesus movement centered in Jerusalem disappeared with most of these other sects of Judaism. So I'll just say that, I think the focus that mythicism has brought on this question has been a good thing.
Okay, that's fair. So what do you think are some of the, or not? Let me rephrase that. Sorry. What are some of the arguments that you hear both in, well, I don't know if I want to say scholarly circles, given that I don't know that I would say that Richard Carrier's work on this counts as scholarly, but in professional circles, shall we say, and also in just when dealing with people on the internet who have bought into the whole mythicist idea, because I know it's particularly popular on the internet, especially among anti-theist, atheist communities. So what are some of the typical arguments that you hear there, and why do you find those uncompelling?
So, as I mentioned, one of the things that that Richard has clearly noticed, and he's grounded his whole minimal Jesus mythicism in this recognition that the only way this works is if you can provide a plausible explanation for the origins of Christianity, and also of the origins of Christianity out of early Judaism. And I would say, so, basically, the arguments that tend to be put forward are, well, in addition to the fact that, well, Jesus, the life and teachings of Jesus appear to be almost unknown to Paul. That's weird. So it must mean that Jesus didn't exist. We can't trust the Gospels at all because they're so heavily theologized. You can almost not you cannot get any kind of reliable history out of there. Lots of times it will be stated that the presentation of Jesus in Paul is more as a celestial being than as an historical figure. And I think that's where some of this starts to fall apart as well. One of the things that what Richard Carrier certainly has attempted to do is to provide an explanation for what we see as clearer indicators of the historicity of Jesus, and attempted to provide counter explanations to those for how that can work for a purely celestial being. And then he's also sought to find evidence of this pure celestial messianic figure within early Judaism. And this is where many of the problems begin. So I'll say at the start too, one of the other real issues here is that when you go back to your earliest text, certainly you can't really find any clearly mythicist texts or traditions. And also what else is very strange is that if mythicism was something that was suppressed in the first century and replaced with this historicized Jesus, the other thing that's missing is any indication or counter testimony to this from early Christian writers. It seems it would seem very strange that this was, the start of this movement, and that it just entirely disappeared, and we have no evidence for it at all within just, a few decades, a century. That seems very unusual. So I have a couple of points here about the problems as I see them. So one of these at the outset, and this was a major feature in the video series that I did about mythicism, is the poor grasp that and I guess at this point I'll just focus on Carrier's minimal mythicism. The poor grasp that Carrier has of early Judaism, and the way he appears to misunderstand even just the idea of Jewish scripture exegesis. So one of the things that Carrier needs to do in establishing his minimal myth theory for Jesus is to point to enough relevant background information within early Judaism prior to the emergence of Christianity, which indicates, yes, these are ideas that Jews entertain. The idea of a celestial Messiah, the idea of a celestial Messiah who would suffer and die and then also rise again. So he jumps into a bunch of early Jewish texts, and he attempts to show from these that, yes, this is something that you can actually find in this early literature. And one of the reasons, the way that he extrapolates that is basically just to go back and say, well, the Jews had these very creative ways of understanding their own texts through what a number of scholars I believe, have unfortunately called Pesher exegesis, which the basic gist of this is that you can turn any text from the Old Testament into an allegorical or metaphorical meaning of whatever you want it to say. So the way Richard's idea works is that we have all these early Jewish texts, so it's possible that they could have been interpreted in such a way to promote this idea of a purely celestial Messiah who, suffered and died and was resurrected. Now, there's a number of problems that I have on this point. So I think the way that these Jewish texts are presented is very frequently extremely problematic, and I'll give an example here from the Wisdom of Solomon, which I believe is a second or first century BCE Jewish text, and from which Richard Carrier and other mythicists promote this idea that this text attests to the possibility that somebody could have read this and said, "Oh, well, this has to do with a rising, a suffering and then rising celestial figure who will save us." So I'm just going to read here Wisdom chapter 5.
Before you do that, real quick, I just want to say thank you to Jens van Broekhoven, who just donated $5 with no message. So thank you very much.
Fabulous. Excellent. So, all right. So this, Richard points to this text and this chapter in particular as evidence for Jewish thinking that, there could be a son of God that suffered and was exalted. So here's the text. It says, starting in chapter 5, it says, "Then the righteous," and this is a plural noun, the righteous people, "will stand with great confidence in the presence of those who have oppressed them, of those who make light of their labors. When the unrighteous," another plural expression, "see them, they will be shaken with dreadful fear, and they will be amazed at the unexpected salvation or deliverance of the righteous people. They will speak to one another in repentance and anguish of spirit, and they will groan and say, 'These are persons whom we once held in derision and made a byword of reproach.'" By the way, I'm reading from the NRSV here. "Fools that we were, we thought that their lives were madness and that their end was without honor. Why have they been numbered among the sons of God?" Now, I'm going to pause here and just say, within early Judaism, and this traces way back into the ancient Israelite religion, this idea of the sons of God traces back to a thought of these are divine beings. They are originally thought of as actual gods. By the time this text was written, it's probable that the writer of this text thought of these as angels. Why is their lot among the saints? This is the NRSV says saints here. These are the Hagia, or the holy ones, which again are indicative of these divine beings. "So it was, we who strayed from the way of the truth, and the light of righteousness did not shine on us, and the sun did not rise upon us. We took our fill of the paths of lawlessness and destruction, and we journeyed through the trackless deserts. But the way of the Lord we have not known. What has our arrogance profited us? And what good has our boasted wealth brought us? All those things have vanished like a shadow, and like a rumor has passed by, like a ship that sails through the billowy waters, and when it has passed, no trace can be found, no track of its keel in the waves. Or, as when a bird flies through the air, no evidence of its passage is found. The light of air lashed by the beat of its pinions and pierced by the force of the rushing flight. It traversed by the movement of its wings, and afterwards no sign of its coming was found there. Or, as when an arrow is shot at a target, the air thus divided comes together at once, so that no one knows its pathway. So we also, as soon as we were born, ceased to be, and we had no sign of virtue to show, but were consumed in our wickedness. Remember, these are the wicked people who are talking. Because the hope of the ungodly is like thistledown carried by the wind, like the light frost driven away by a storm. It is dispersed like smoke before the wind, and it passes like the remembrance of a guest who stays but a day. But the righteous, this is plural again, the righteous people will live forever, and their reward is with the Lord. The Most High takes care of them. Therefore, they will receive a glorious crown and a beautiful diadem from the hand of the Lord, because with his right hand he will cover them, and with his arm he will shield them. The Lord will take his zeal as the whole armor and will arm all creation to repel his enemies. He will put on righteousness as a breastplate. He will wear impartial justice as a helmet. He will take holiness as an invincible shield and sharpen stern wrath for a sword. And creation will join him and fight against his frenzied foes. So I'll just stop there. But Carrier will focus in on these points here in where is it, in verses 15 and 16. The righteous will live forever. Their reward is with the Lord. The Most High will take care of them. They will receive a glorious crown and a beautiful diadem from the hand of the Lord. So he explains this on the basis that it's possible within Judaism to understand that this could potentially refer to a single celestial figure, a son of God who suffered and who was crowned as the king of the universe. So
does he just not know the difference between singular and plural nouns in Greek?
I assume that's got to be it, because the text is actually pretty abundantly clear about what's going on here. Of course, I think, and this is one of the problems that I see in this idea is the way that it flirts with falsifiability, because I think the retreat to that is, well, yeah, but you Jews did weird things with their text, so they could totally just extrapolate from plural expressions to apply to an individual. So it's in my opinion, it's a bad argument. So that's that. Now I wanted to say something else here about the Pesharim. So one of the things, the way that these ideas survive is in suggesting that, again, Jews did weird things with their texts. We have examples of this in a collection of literature from the Dead Sea Scrolls we identify as Pesharim, based on the usage of this word Peshar, which in Hebrew means its meaning or its interpretation, in terms of how they extrapolate earlier scriptures. So I thought at this point, I'm just going to read. I did a whole video about this on my channel. There's a video that talks about how we should understand the Pesharim from Qumran. It's in my series, The Dead Sea Scrolls Unapologetically, and I'm just going to read a little bit from the script of that video to sort of explain how this works here.
So right before you do that, I just want to say thank you. There was an anonymous $20 donation. I really appreciate that. So whomever you are, very, very much appreciated.
Excellent. So I'll just explain what the Pesharim are. These are texts from the Dead Sea Scrolls, which very interestingly will present a citation from scripture of some sort, usually the prophets. We have Peshers of Habakkuk, Micah, Nahum, also of the Psalms and Isaiah, possibly of Genesis. So they're taking these ancient texts of scripture, they're citing passages from them, and then they're providing a comment on what they think the text means. So this is from what's called the Pesher Nahum. So this is an interpretation of the book of Nahum, and this is what it says: where the lion's den, or where is the lion's den, the feeding place for the cubs? So this is a citation of Nahum chapter 2, verse 12. The meaning concerns a residence for wicked Gentiles. Wherefore the lion walks to enter, there also are his cubs without fear. So that's a continuation of the text. The meaning concerns Demetrius, king of Greece, who sought to enter Jerusalem on the council of the seekers of smooth things. This is a pet name that the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls had for the Pharisees. But he did not enter because God did not deliver Jerusalem into the hand of the kings of Greece from Antiochus until the rising of the rulers of the Kittim. The Kittim are the Romans. But afterwards, it will be trampled by the Gentiles. So I'll just read a little bit of some of my own commentary on what's going on here. So this Pesher, like all the Pesherim, is providing reflection on what has happened in history, but through the lens of what was said centuries earlier by the prophets. In this case, what was said by the 7th century prophet Nahum, I think it would. I had a citation here from another scholar by the name of Professor James Kugel. I disagree with Kugel that the scriptures were not considered by these people to be fundamentally history. To my eye, history has to be the focal point about what readers believe these texts were doing. For the writers and the collectors of the scrolls, the reason these ancient texts were important is because they recorded history before it even happened. The readers of the ancient scriptures knew what happened. They were there. And they were assured of the reality of what happened because of what the scriptures told them happened. So we know only small amounts, scant amounts of these people, who they were and where they came from. No one in the scrolls self-identifies, and they never identify any of their contemporaries or their opponents, not directly. They use ciphers, like the Kittim were the Romans, the seekers of smooth things or flattery or what's easy. These were the Pharisees, and this was cleverly formulated through a play on words. Dorshe ha-chalakot, which means seekers of the smooth things, looks and sounds virtually identical to Dorshe ha-halakot, the seekers of various halakha. But
okay,
cool, eh? I think that's pretty cool.
Fun.
I know.
We have a $20 donation from Stuart who says, not sure why we're supposed to believe, quote, debunking from an obvious reptoid. And I have to say, it's a fair point.
Oh, God. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
We should maybe just end the stream there. I don't know. But if people want, I'll continue. So
please do.
There's a recurring mention in these texts, in the Pesherim, of this figure that's known through several of the scrolls, the Moreh HaTzedek, or the teacher of righteousness. And based on what is said about this person in the Pesherim, like in the Habakkuk Pesher and some of the Isaiah Pesherim, it seems that this man was a priest living at some point in the recollected past who ran afoul of the Jerusalem temple and the ruling Sadducite priesthood, whoever that was. In the Pesher on Habakkuk 2:15, it says this: woe to the one who gets his friend drunk, pouring out his wrath, indeed making him drunk just to get a look at their holy days. So that's a quotation of Habakkuk 2:15. Here's the comment. The meaning concerns the wicked priest who chased after the teacher of righteousness to destroy him in the fury of his wrath as far as his house of exile. In the time appointed for repose on the Day of Atonement, he appeared to them in order to destroy them and to cause their destruction of the fast day, the Sabbath of their repose. So, the point I'm trying to get at here, and the point I'm trying to make through attempting to correctly contextualize these texts, is that, like, these when early Jews were reading their texts and looking intently for deeper meanings on what they said, almost always. In fact, I think it might be always. This had to do with what was happening to them in the moment.
Which makes
Stuff that
sense,
was
right?
right. They're this is a way of history writing, in a sense. They are interpreting their history through going back and looking at these very old ancient texts to see what they had to say about what would happen. Um, I'll just finish this point with this. It's interesting, if understandable, that these ancient methods for thinking about and reading sacred texts came to inform the way so many of us now regard scripture. For numerous people, finding hidden meanings about our modern 21st century world is just a natural way to read their Bibles. We owe a debt, for better or worse, to our bibliophilic forebears at Qumran, in rabbinic Judaism, and in the early church. In view of this, let's that's the end of that. So basically, like that's the point, right? Like
Right.
these are very much about history, and when you understand them as such, like when you understand them as explorations of history, it becomes much more difficult to hold on to this idea that they're just inventing stuff out of whole cloth, out of reading the text of scripture, because we don't see that, like for the early Jews, this is just not how they used these texts. It's just not.
And I
So,
think that applying the text to right now, I mean, that's just how else do you read if you're looking for something that you're trying to read for your own current edification about your circumstances right now, right? Like people who read the Bible devotionally are reading it for their own spiritual edification right now. How else could they possibly read it? Like, what
exactly.
good would it be if you only thought of it in terms of what good would it be devotionally if the only way you thought about it was in terms of its original context? Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't think about it in terms of its original context. It's absolutely imperative to think
Yeah,
about any text in terms of its original context. But also, you need to think about text in terms of what does it mean for you right now. That's kind of the point of reading. If all we cared about was the original context, then I mean, there might be a few people like me or you that would be interested still because we're interested in history just for its own sake. But for the most part, people wouldn't care about text generally, not just the Bible, but like,
true. Yeah,
I mean, who would be reading Plato if no one thought that Plato had something to say to us today?
exactly. Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, that's as a scholar of early Judaism, that's what I spend most of my time exploring, is what we call the reception history of this literature. Yes, I am first and foremost interested in what the texts mean in their original context, but
Mhm.
it doesn't stop there, right?
Right.
I the A part of my job is to understand how these texts came to be developed and transmitted and interpreted over time.
Mhm.
So, but I mean, for my way of thinking, this is just such a critical point that you can't gloss over. Having a correct, clear understanding of the way the early Jews handled their scriptures is a real problem for Richard Carrier's Mythicism in particular, and that brings me to another point here, which are these source issues. Um, Carrier in his book spends a lot of time um, mining basically the rabbinic literature, the Talmud, mostly the Babylonian Talmud, but also like the Mishnah, the Mishnah and the Talmud Yerushalmi, or the Jerusalem Talmud. And at this point, uh, I mean, there's enormous problems with the way that he reads these texts. And at this point, I'll just direct you to a friend of mine who I do see in the chat. Simone is a graduate student in rabbinic literature, and she runs a blog called help me out, Simone, if you can pop it in the chat there. Is it Simone reads something. I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank at the moment, but she's written 7 extensive, detailed, in-depth articles.
Wow.
Simone reads text. Thank you. 7 excellent, in-depth articles, all about the numerous problems of Carrier's handling of the, in particular, the Babylonian Talmud. So I would just refer you there, but I'll say a couple of things about this. So when it comes to the Talmud and the Mishnah, people, in understanding what these are rabbinic. This is the rabbinic Jewish literature. The Mishnah was put together sometime after the 2nd century CE. The Talmud Bavli, or the Babylonian Talmud, and the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, are commentaries then on most simply on like the early material that you find in the Mishnah, and these weren't put together until after like the 5th and the 6th century CE. Importantly, what Carrier tends to do when he handles this literature, the way he approaches the rabbinic literature, is to say, well, here we have a collection of I'll just say, it's nice to see you, Pat. Good to see you here today. I'm just going to turn that off. So the Carrier approaches these texts as a primary source for the things that people thought and wrote about in early Judaism. And very often he treats them almost in a vacuum. And he'll say on occasion that, this tradition that you find within the Talmud could, it doesn't make any sense, that you can only understood that it developed independent of Christianity, because there's no way they would promote this idea, which seems to align with what Christians were teaching about Jesus. And this is hugely problematic. Simone goes into quite a bit of good detail in this to show how much the rabbinic literature developed alongside of their experiences with Christians. From the beginning, Jews were living in the same places as Christians. They knew who they were. They traded with them. They interacted with them. The idea, and there's lots of places. One of the features of the academic study of rabbinic literature is teasing out and showing how so many of these texts developed in response to, or as in response to, or out of interactions with other Christians. So, the rabbinic literature is even later than the early Christian literature we have.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that rabbinic literature itself has a historical context that can't be ignored, and that often that context involves living in places controlled by Christians?
Exactly.
That seems very far-fetched. I got to be honest with you, Kip.
Wow.
I don't know if I buy that.
I mean, and here's one of the things that I'll just give you an example of one of the things that Carrier does with the rabbinic text. So, the passage that I read from Romans chapter 1. Did I? Oh, there we go. Yeah. So I'll just pull it up here again. As I mentioned, one of the things that mythicists must contend with are these statements by Paul, which appear to clearly indicate that Jesus was a human being. So I'll just read this again. Paul, a servant of Jesus Christ, called to be an apostle, set apart for the gospel of God, which he promised beforehand through his prophets in the Holy Scriptures, the gospel concerning his Son, who is descended from David according to the flesh, and was declared the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection of the dead, Jesus Christ our Lord. So what Carrier does when he encounters this text is he says, well, Paul's not actually saying that Jesus descended from David, because the word there is ginomai, which can be translated in certain contexts as made, or as he puts it, manufactured. So what Paul is actually saying here is that Jesus was manufactured from David, from the sperm of David, or the seed of David, as it literally says in the text,
That
according
is
to the flesh.
extremely tortured reading.
Yes, it is, and I'll explain a little bit here why in a minute. But then Richard does something else. He goes and he pulls up a tractate from the Babylonian Talmud that appears in Nida 16b. I've got it here. I'm just gonna pull it up and read to you here. So this Nida is a rabbinic tractate that has to do with issues of women, and issues of impurity and sex and all sorts of really interesting stuff going on there.
Doesn't the title of the tractate actually mean women?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So exactly. So
see, I know a little bit.
You know a little bit. So here, I'll just read this. I'll just read the part of the tractate here. This is from the Gemara, or the earlier collection. I believe it's of the Mishnah and the Tosefta. I might get that wrong. Someone will correct me, or she could just tell me what the Gemara is in the comments. So here is what it says. How does Reish Lakish interpret this verse cited by Rabbi Yochanan? And the verse in question, it's Job 3 verse 3. Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night on which it was said conceived by a man-child, as well as Proverbs chapter 19 verse 16. But he who despises his way shall die. So how does Reish Lakish interpret this verse? By Rabbi Yochanan. So the answer is that he requires for that which Rabbi Hanina bar Papa taught. As Rabbi Hanina bar Papa interpreted, that angel is appointed over the conception is called Night. So this is the name of an angel. This angel is named Night, and he takes a drop. That's all it says, is he takes a drop. This is a drop of semen, probably. And then he presents it before the Holy One, blessed be he. And he says before him, Master of the universe, what will be of this drop? Mighty or weak, clever or stupid, wealthy or poor. So what this rabbinic tractate is, or I should say the interpretation of a rabbi, Rabbi Hanina bar Papa, by the way, was from sometime in the late 3rd or early 4th century CE. We don't know exactly when he lived, but we know that Rabbi Papa, who was his teacher, was active in 360. So he's later than that, right? So what Rabbi Hanina bar Papa is saying is that there's this angel of conception. The angel's conception is named Night. And what he does in coitus is he will grab a drop of semen. He brings it before God and says, tell us what kind of a person this is going to be. So Richard takes that tractate and then basically makes this argument. Look, Jews believed weird things. They believed that, you could do stuff like this with sperm. Ergo, it stands to reason that you could read this passage from Romans chapter 1 as if God has collected sperm from David and held on to it. And then at the right moment, he made Jesus out of it.
But this is also just verbiage that's typical of how when you're just discussing normal human conception.
Well, that's just it, right? So what the passage says, and this is part of the huge problem here. One of the things that Richard makes a big deal of is the fact that Paul, when he's speaking of Jesus and Jesus existence and his birth uses this Greek word ginomai, where there's like a very handful of there's a small handful of places where Paul refers to other people's births using another word, which means just to be born, genao. The two words are actually related in Greek, but the word ginomai is just an extremely flexible, ubiquitous word. I mean, the general translation, the general meaning of ginomai is to be or to become.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said to a mythicist once, it's virtually impossible to build a theology or a worldview on the basis of a word as ubiquitous and flexible as to become.
Yeah.
And that's basically what Paul is saying here. He says that Jesus was, using ginomai, descended from, and that's spermatos, the seed of David. And this reflects a very common way within the Hebrew scriptures to express natural descent. The Hebrew word, the Hebrew noun sperm or seed is very frequently used just to indicate descendants.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's pretty literal in that sense, right? It's
very much so.
You're having someone who fertilizes someone else. That person then gives birth to someone via that seed that was originally used in fertilization. Like, it's a very literal thing that's happening right here. We don't need lots of weird interpretations to understand this. And that's one of the things that bugs me is like, look, you can have all sorts of crazy interpretations if you want, but if you want to convince someone else that your interpretations are reasonable, and I come to this text and it's just using relatively ordinary language to talk about human, ancestor-descendant relationships, you're going to have to do a lot to convince me that I should actually take this ordinary word in some extremely unusual way. And it's kind of the same criticism I levy at people who are like, why take, Genesis 7 literally? I'm like, okay, so what is the literal aspect to like these windows of heaven? Because it's a very ordinary word, right? They're windows, they're openings in the sky. That's what the text says. When you're telling me that's not what the text says, like it's right there in front of me. What is your excuse? Which actually leads into the kind of the last topic I want to go into before we wrap it up, because we are at about 2 hours now.
Okay.
And this is a conversation that you and I have had in brief, which is to say that there's a kind of a connection between how mythicism behaves as both a movement and how mythicists behave in terms of in discussion. And there's a connection with that and how my more typical topic of discussion, young earth creationism, behaves as a movement, and how individuals who are members of that group behave in discussions with others. Could you go over what you see as like the similarities between these two things? Because I actually see them as sort of sides of the same coin, right? The people who would be young earth creationists if they were Christians are in many cases now just mythicists while being atheists. In fact, I know of a number of people who literally did that transition. They went from young earth creationist Christians to mythicist atheists.
Right. Yeah, probably. So I'm actually trying to pull this. I'm going to try and pull this up here because I have addressed this. I posted something on Twitter a while ago, and I'm just going to try and pull this up. If I
while you're working on that, we have an anonymous donation of $10. Thank you very much. Guys, I once again want to say while Kip is pulling this up that I really do appreciate all the support. When this ridiculousness started, I'll be honest, it was not a good time. I had to reach out to get some just basic like things are going to be okay support from various people. And I started up this the fundraiser, and I started encouraging people like if they can afford it to increase their pledge on Patreon and whatnot. And so the amount of support has been exceptional, and I just want to say thank you so much to everyone who has donated to the GoFundMe, who's pledged on Patreon, or who's up their Patreon pledge. It is I don't know that I can express adequately how much that means to me. But now that we have it, let's go ahead with what Dr. Kill has for us.
So, in terms of this overlap, this is something I have noticed, and I just pulled up a number of points of crossover that I tend to see between the movements, creationism and mythicism. They're microscopically fringe theories rejected by virtually the entire establishment. They survive exclusively on the internet or in entrenched cultural enclaves. Support for them is bolstered by one or two Ivy League graduates writing out of their field of study. I'll just make a point here that while Richard Carrier is a credentialed historian, and an ancient historian, problematically, importantly, he has no training at all in early Judaism, early Jewish literature. He can't read the texts in their original languages. And I would even go so far as to say that I have serious questions about how much professional training he actually has in like Christian origins and in the New Testament. Yeah. So they survive on question begging with no real interest in the broader field of study, biology, and early Judaism or Christianity. They consistently misunderstand and misrepresent cherry-picked data. They construct faulty models through redefining well-established technical terminology and concepts. They are deeply suspicious of scholarship in the academic consensus as part of some deep conspiracy, dark conspiracy. And you will hear this all the time from proponents of mythicists that, you know, New Testament scholars are just gatekeeping. And it doesn't even matter that well, they'll say that most New Testament scholars are actually Christians, which is true and makes sense. But
it does seem like the group of people who would be most interested in that group of texts.
exactly. But importantly, we're not just talking about New Testament scholars here. We're also talking about scholars of early Judaism who are actually mostly Jewish and don't really care about Christianity, right? And then you also have a number, maybe not, it's not a big number, I don't think, but there certainly are a number of scholars who are secular. Like they're not Christians who are, you know, scholars of the New Testament, scholars of early Judaism, scholars of the history and the literature of the period. And what you'll often hear from mythicists is that, yes, but all of these guys were trained by people who are Christians and at institutions which are, you know, overtly Christian, and
So just
they're just, you know,
doubling down on
towing
the
party line.
they're just doubling
Yeah.
down on the genetic fallacy, where it's like,
Yeah.
well, you know, they were taught by a Christian, so ultimately it all just comes out of dogmatic Christianity. You got to get rid of all of it. Hey,
Yeah.
pro tip to both the young Earth creationists and the mythicists out there: the genetic fallacy is called a genetic fallacy because it's fallacious. You shouldn't use it. Just gonna put that out there.
All right. So, the leaders of both movements harbor persecution complexes and insist that all critiques of their theories are emotionally and agenda driven. Proponents of these theories engage in promoting authority structures whereby their leaders are above criticism and error. Very often, I've seen now that, you know, Richard Carrier in particular, having not a lick of training in early Jewish literature, can't read the languages, has never studied it formally as part of his academic programs, is often promoted as an expert in, you know, early Judaism. People will go to him to learn about what early Judaism was and how it, you know, and its history and its teachings. So, and finally, they insist that the paradigm is shifting and the consensus is slowly turning in their favor. So, when Richard published On the Historicity of Jesus back in 2012, this was sort of the idea was that, well, it's this small fringe idea now, but just wait 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, it's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to gain prominence. We're just at we're at the tipping point here, and things are going to start to shift slowly in our favor. In terms of mythicism, that has not happened. Like I said, it's been 10 years so far. Richard's book and then the other one written by his friend Raphael Letester are the only scholarly forays into this idea. They have not been well received within the field, and people have moved on.
It actually reminds me of decades ago, there was a book written called Evolution, A Theory in Crisis. And you can hear creationists refer to evolution as a theory in crisis for all of the intervening decades. And when I say decades ago, I mean like the 70s or the 80s, right? And like you tell that to an actual like biologist, and they'll just look at you like, what? What's the crisis? What are you talking about? And the only thing that anyone comes up with is like, well, people have a disagreement about whether or not flight evolved because of attempts to leap for prey from the ground, or because of attempts to glide from tree to tree up in, arboreal life. It's like, okay, cool. And it's the same thing right here, right? Yep. Like we get these things where it's like, oh, well, these so-called scholars can't agree on every last detail of Jesus's life. Like, some of them think maybe he was born in Bethlehem, and maybe he was like, okay, great. That there is a disagreement in a field doesn't negate the consensus of the field where it exists.
Precisely. Yes. So something that Richard's been doing for a few years now is he has compiled a list that he's published on his blog of scholars who I think it's the list is scholars who think that mythicism should at a minimum be taken seriously as
low bar,
an idea.
But okay.
So, and he's up to, I think, 42 scholars. Of course, his definition of this is really, really, really broad. I think he gets there by cherry picking a lot of public statements made by academics. I've caught a couple of these. The last two entries on his on this blog post, I looked into on another stream last month, I believe, over at Potential Theists channel. But basically, he's presenting when a scholar will attempt to be responsible in his language, when an historian will say things like Jesus probably existed, or Jesus purportedly existed, he will capitalize on this as an indication that, well, this is a person who at least takes the question seriously. And I'll say one other thing here too. I would say that most scholars in the field take the question seriously insofar as we recognize the problems of promoting an historical Jesus. As it stands now, and my own personal feelings are this is the best explanation of all the data that we have. But I'm so limited in terms of what I can actually say and how far this actually gets me, that I have to continue to be open to the idea that, yeah, maybe there was no historical Jesus. Seems most likely that there was, but it's possible. Certainly.
That's actually another connection with a lot of young earth creationist literature that you see. You'll see a lot of the times that they'll complain about the use of couched language in published papers, right? They'll say like, well, look at this. They're just saying this suggests X, or they'll say based on X, we can infer. See, they're not sure about anything. And it's like, are you just unfamiliar with how academic literature works? You generally don't make an absolute statement, because generally speaking, even if you're at like, oh, okay, based on my statistics here, the chances of me being wrong are like 1 in like 10 trillion. Guess what? 1 in 10 trillion isn't just 1, right? So like
Exactly.
you still just go with like, well, it suggests it. I propose this. I can infer. You always say that because,
And
guess what? You're not omniscient.
exactly. And this is something too, especially when speaking colloquially. Scholars will continue to mess up all the time. I do it constantly, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I was called out on this very recently, where I made a statement. This had to do. I was responding to something about gospel authorship. There's a famous statement by Papias, who wrote in the late first century, early second century, I believe, where he describes the Gospel of Matthew as having originally been written in the Hebrew language.
Oh, we just talked about this, yeah.
Right, yeah. So this is something that scholars are almost completely certain is not the case. The Gospel of Matthew, as we have it in Greek, appears to have been written in Greek and not
Right.
There are no indications that it was translated from a Semitic original, like a Hebrew or an Aramaic original. And so I said, the Gospel of Matthew was absolutely not translated from a Semitic original. And somebody called me out on that and basically said, "Well, you can't say that."
Yeah.
And I have to,
Technically, no,
yeah,
you
you're
can't.
right. I can't, right? Like, I mean, of course, there is the remotest of possibilities that this was actually a translation, and we just cannot detect it at all. But it sure doesn't seem like it. I
Right.
would, it's the same sort of thing, right? We
Mhm.
will make these sorts of overstatements and misstatements, but I tend to think that a lot of the rhetoric survives on this kind of cherry picked information.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kip, for not just having the conversation, but also allowing me to co-opt your platform for my own nefarious purposes. I don't know. I guess I get maybe I'm. You know what it is? According to at least some of the mythicists, I'm actually secretly trying to convert everyone to Christianity on the basis
Right.
of the mere fact that there was a guy.
Yeah.
That's all it takes,
That's
apparently. Yeah.
it's what we're doing.
I mean, if there's
So
one thing that people who watch my channel know, it's how hard I push to convert everyone who watches to Christianity. It's my constant goal all the time.
it's what I see. Yeah. And I think it's a fair characterization of my own work as well.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah. Look, if there's one thing that I know about you, Dr. Kip Davis, it's that you're actually a crypto Christian who's just secretly saying rosaries off camera constantly.
because you see me off camera.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, well,
So
us YouTubers, we have those like backdoor channels where we can check out what everyone else is doing off camera. Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. Well, no, it has been my absolute pleasure to be here. I had a lot of fun. I am very pleased that we were able to pull this off. I
Same.
think everybody uh deserves like a huge thanks, and both uh Dapper Dinosaurs and my gratitude for making sure that this unfortunate hole in his catalog has been filled. I just went and took a look at the GoFundMe. I'm really happy to see that you hit you almost hit the target of what
Yeah.
you were shooting for. So thank
And
you
look,
everyone
I want to say
for
about that target, it's just a number that was pulled out of thin air. It doesn't mean anything in particular, right? So like if we go a bit under, it's like that's fine. If we go a bit over, that's great. But it was not like
yeah.
at this amount of money, now this thing can be. It was just a number that I picked because it was like it's not a crazy amount of money for me to say like this is roughly what this current strike is pulling out of my budget. So
But those sorts of budget shortfalls suck.
they really do.
Totally do. So,
Yeah, like
and
I
especially
saving
when
for a few
it
things, and yeah,
yeah. And when especially when it's so, you know, unwarranted. There was one more thing I wanted to say, and this is something. This was supposed to be a surprise, Dapper Dinosaur. Unfortunately, I couldn't pull it off, but I had extended an invitation to Kent Hovind to join us today, and he was really looking forward to it. But then, he's pretty sick right now. So, and he texted me back like an hour ago and said that he was trying to make it, but just couldn't. I'm sorry, everyone, that we couldn't get a guest appearance from Kent Hovind.
I had a debate with him, and it originally aired on both his and my channels. And not only did I use a sound clip from that in every single one of my videos, including this one that we heard in the...
Yeah, I heard it.
Yeah, I'm also pleased to say that while his original channel was up, he never added that debate to his debate playlist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was still up on the channel, but he just never got around to adding that to the playlist for some mysterious reason.
Very nice. So, in case anybody's out of the loop here, my good friend, Dr. Joshua Bowen from Digital Hammurabi, does the best Kent Hovind but let's be honest here. He does the only Kent Hovind impersonation that you'll ever see. But my God, is it good? He was trying really hard to pop in today to grace us with that, but unfortunately he has had a rough couple of days. So
yeah, that's sad.
For those of you who are into praying, pray for Dr. Josh.
And hey, if you want to see him and I interact, we do have a live stream that we did together on my channel
recently, too, I think, right?
I mean, it wasn't super recently, but it wasn't that long.
Okay.
I mean, in internet terms, it's ancient history, but normal terms, it wasn't that long ago. But it's about Mesopotamian languages, and we don't touch on biblical slavery because that's what everyone talks to Dr. Josh about. And I was like, no, we're not doing that. We're doing a different topic. So we talked about like Sumerian grammar, Akkadian, the interaction between them. So if you want to get like deeply nerdy about extinct languages, go check that out. If you want to hear what Dr. Josh Bowen has to say to counter Christian apologists who are saying that biblical slavery either didn't exist or it was not that bad or whatever, go see anything else he's ever done online.
It's his thing now, right?
Yeah.
He
actually recently wrote a book about
the slavery guy.
And I read the book in manuscripts, and it was great.
The second edition of his Did the Bible Endorse Slavery or Condone Slavery? I don't even remember what it's called, but it's out and it's fantastic. Yeah. And it's to the point now, I mean, he'll never say this, right? And he's very careful to point out that these are not scholarly books, that he's just collecting the information that's being put together by scholars, and that these books are like a clearinghouse for that. But I gotta tell you, that most recent one, his second edition of Biblical Slavery, is certainly a book that on this topic it can't be ignored. It's easily the best, most accessible collection on the topic. And if you are interested in nerding out about ancient languages, Dr. Josh and I every second Thursday run a reading group. We're reading through 1 Kings chapter 1 right now in Hebrew. Nice. We unfortunately were unable to do it this last Thursday, but we will be back in 2 weeks. If you know a little bit of Hebrew, if you're interested in the language at all, come and check it out. It's fun.
All right. Well, I think with that, we're going to wrap things up. If you're one of the people who is on my supporter-only Discords, I'm going to be heading over there, and we're going to watch some Power Rangers Time Force, if you can believe it. And then, that's it for me. So thank you again so much. I thank you, obviously, to the audience. You guys have been great. So
yes, thank you very much. So, and I'm going to go off and get ready for my dinner with a
Enjoy.
professional creation evangelist.
Please report back.
Absolutely. All right.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Dapper Dinosaur.
Thank you.
I hope everyone has a good day. Later.
Bye. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Phil Havara, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Denny5252, Elaram Teller, Horseflesh, Ian Chan, Kelvin Brostek Van Manen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babbity, Monkey They Them, Robert Carpenter, Sphincter of Doom, Volus, Eta V, and Strawberry Vein. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.